Okay, I think we are all ready. I believe I have all the committee members. I see Jan, City Manager Bronson, and City Attorney Hale. So I think we are all ready to go. I believe City Manager Bronson is going to start this off.
Thank you, City Clerk Sims. Welcome, committee members. I will just begin until such time that the committee chooses a chair and vice chair, and then I will defer to Mr. or Madam Chair to take the rest of the meeting at that point. So we have officially called to order the meeting of the Citizen Oversight Committee for City Revenue Measures. The first thing we'll do is a flag salute. So I guess let's all do it. We can do it together. Hand over your heart. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Thank you all. Next, I'll ask the city clerk to do a roll call, please.
Committee Member Holden.
Here.
Committee Member Della Rosa. I think you're muted. Well, I know you're here. There you are.
Here. I'm
yes,
here.
I see you. Committee Member Cass.
Here.
Committee Member Reynolds.
Here.
And Committee Member Tripp.
Here.
Thank you, Madam City Clerk. Once again, we would like to welcome you to what is now the second meeting of the newly constituted and expanded Oversight Committee. I'm City Manager Matt Bronson, and I'll be ultimately lead staff for the committee, but working closely with our City Clerk and also our Administrative Services Director, Deanne Purcell, who will be the primary content person working with the committee, given the nature of the committee's scope. So at this time, next item is appointment of Citizen Oversight Committee Chair and Vice Chair. So we'll begin with the chair position, and we are looking for a nomination, and a committee member can nominate themselves, or they can nominate somebody else in the committee to be the chairperson of the committee, and this will be for a one-year time frame until this time next year. So I'll open the floor and invite any member of the committee to nominate, again, themselves or nominate another member of the committee. Just for reference, committee members Holden and Tripp were the previous committee members, and I believe, Ms. Holden, you were the previous chair of the previous committee, and I'll defer to the committee to change that or keep that role or modify in some way as the committee sees fit. But thank you.
I'll nominate myself if there are no other nominations, but otherwise I'll defer to the judgment of my colleagues.
Or I'll nominate Ann to remain on as the chair. And Ann, you're muted.
I'd rather not.
So
I'll second the Jonathan's nomination.
Well, I heard a motion by committee member Reynolds and seconded by committee member Holden. Any further discussion on the nomination? Seeing none, all in favor, say aye.
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 Any opposed? All right, Mr. Reynolds, congratulations. You are now the chair of the Citizen Oversight Committee for City Revenue Measures. Chair Reynolds. We have a canine voice of support. Well, at this time, we'll also be looking for a nomination for vice chair of the committee. So same process, we'll open the floor for anybody to nominate themselves or another member of the committee.
I'll nominate committee member Holden.
That's okay with me.
We'll take that as a second. All right, motion made and seconded to have committee member Holden be the vice chair. Any further discussion on the motion? Seeing none, all in favor, say aye.
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 Any opposed? Motion carries. Congratulations, Ms. Holden. You are the vice chair of the committee. So we have Chair Reynolds and Vice Chair Holden. And at this point, I will turn it over to Chair Reynolds to lead us through the rest of the meeting. If you have the agenda in front of you, sir, and we'd be glad to support you as well if you would like.
I do have the agenda in front of me, and I'll ask for a little bit of direction regarding the order of things. I do have questions following up from our last meeting. It references to some of the documents that we've been provided. But if we need to start with the consent agenda, then I would motion for consent on the minutes of the Citizens Oversight Committee for City Revenue Measures special meeting on Thursday, October 7th, 2020, and regular meeting Wednesday, September 1st, 2021.
And just one quick thing, Chair Reynolds, is that before the consent calendar, we'll need to ask if there's any public communication from any member of the public that may wish to address the committee. So with your indulgence, I'll ask if Madam Sims, is there any public comment?
No, we have no one on the line.
Okay, got it. So that was the next item. Now we're on to the consent calendar, and the first thing will be to see if there are any questions on the minutes from the committee.
Any questions on the minutes from the committee? Then I would move to approve the minutes as submitted for the minutes of the Citizens Oversight Committee for City Revenue Measures special meeting on Thursday, October 7th, 2020, and regular meeting of Wednesday, September 1st, 2021.
I'll second.
Any objections? All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Aye. The next item on the agenda is our regular business and is discussion of the Ralph M. Brown Act by City Attorney Hale. I think that would probably be good to go straight into prior to any questions. So if Mr. Hale would like to proceed, we welcome it.
Thank you, Chair. My name is David Hale. I'm the city attorney for the city of Grover Beach. What they have asked me to do this afternoon is to give you a brief summary and sort of some background related to the Ralph M. Brown Act, which I will call the Brown Act for purposes of brevity for the rest of the meeting. Just to give you some background, the Government Code section 54950 through 54963 is the statutory provisions wherein you will find the Brown Act. Proposition 54 that was adopted in 2004, which amended the California Constitution, had a very specific provision in there that sort of summarizes what the Brown Act is all about. And it says that people have the right to access of information concerning the conduct of the people's business, and therefore the meetings of public bodies and the writings of public officials and agencies shall be open to public scrutiny. For the most part, you will be working in a fishbowl. What you do, with very, very limited exceptions, are subject to public scrutiny, public review, and public discussion. I don't have to say go to the next slide because Ms. Sims has already got me there. The Government Code section in the Brown Act covers a number of different bodies. Essentially, it refers to legislative bodies. And that may be a little misleading because the breadth of the definition of legislative bodies encompasses city councils, board of supervisors, school boards, trustees, and it also includes, and I'll explain in a little bit, standing committees, which is what you are. This doesn't really affect you, but to the extent that you were unelected from the time that the election results are determined to the time you actually are sworn into office, you are also subject to the Brown Act. Next slide. So legislative bodies, by definition, include appointed bodies and standing committees. Doesn't really apply to you, but just so you're aware, they can also apply to private entities such as 501c3s and nonprofits, to the extent that those governing bodies are in fact created by a legislative body that is subject to the Brown Act. Next slide. So for the most part, the kinds of meetings that the Brown Act will come into play are regular meetings. Those are the kinds of meetings that you will have on a regular basis. That are defined usually in your bylaws or in some statutory or ordinance provisions or resolutions that define specifically the dates that you meet. Special meetings are meetings that you, for unique reasons, need a meeting outside of the regularly defined regular meetings. You have emergency meetings. Those are the kinds where circumstances arise where you don't have time to give notice, so you need to meet immediately. Adjourned meetings are essentially meetings wherein you've adjourned and shall I say, rescheduled the meeting, and therefore you're required to comply with the Brown Act when in fact you come back into session. And what I'll discuss in probably more detail, because it'll probably more affect you, are meetings that under certain circumstance will be subject to the Brown Act through individual contacts and informal gatherings. Most of the time they are not, but there are occasions when they are. The first one where we can talk about exceptions to meetings are, can you speak to the general public? And the answer is yes. And the first bullet point says, unless it's a serial meeting. And this is where it gets a little complicated under the Brown Act. And that is, can an individual come to each one of you and have a discussion related to a specific agenda item that you may be having or may be considering at your next meeting? Technically, the answer is yes, but my advice to you is that you have to be incredibly cautious, because you can violate the Brown Act in the form of what's called a daisy chain or a hub and spoke serial meeting. And what that means is if that individual is going to each one of you and having a conversation with you related to essentially polling your opinion or getting consensus over all of the members of the commission, and doing so in a manner where he's advising each of you of, well, I just talked to person A, and oh, by the way, person A is opposed to this. What's your opinion? And he goes to person 3 and says, oh, by the way, I talked to person 1 and 2, and they're opposed to this. What's your position? He's polling you and essentially creating a serial meeting that you would be in violation of the Brown Act. So from my perspective, I'd be very, very cautious. If you do in fact have contact with the general public over matters that relate to agenda items, my recommendation is you keep it very factual and you keep it specific to the points of the agenda item, and do not bring into any conversations what was said by any other member of the commission. Daisy chain is essentially you talk to Commissioner number 2 talks to Commissioner number 3 talks to Commissioner number 4. You've just committed a violation of the Brown Act and created a serial meeting. So I don't recommend that you do that either. The other area where individual contact can come into play, which can get you in trouble, even though it may be very unintentional, is social media. To the extent that you are participating in social media and you're talking about city business, and another council member gets on, another commissioner gets on, and you're speaking back and forth to each other, that's not a violation of the Brown Act until such time as you have a quorum. But if you have, as part of that posting or as part of that contact, a quorum or more of the commissioners involved in this conversation, you are committing a violation of the Brown Act. So I'd be very careful about social media. You can certainly have conversations with members of the public. You can talk about issues of the city, but be very careful about who you befriend and those communications. The other issue is on occasions, it's probably not going to be very frequent, but I may give you emails. I may give you legal advice. Typically, when I give legal advice to members of the council or the planning commission or your commission, if I give legal advice, I will copy all members of that board or commission or council. And I do that as a courtesy to all of you so that you understand if there is a legal issue that's being requested or I'm being asked about and I'm responding back to that and giving legal advice, I'm giving it to you all. Having said that, do not hit send to all and respond back to me, because the moment you do, you violate the Brown Act. So what I would recommend is that if you get contact from me, you respond back to me only. If I give you an email and it includes all of you, and this applies to emails amongst you, you do not want to hit send to all back again and copy everybody, because then you have an issue of what functionally amounts to a serial meeting. Conferences, you can attend conferences. League of Cities is a good example of a conference that happens every year, and a good share of, not usually a quorum of the council members go to it or have in the past prior to the pandemic. And I follow around behind them and make sure they don't talk about business. No, I'm just kidding. You can go to a conference like that and the entire commission can be there. You just cannot talk about city business. You can talk about relevant issues that may in a generic way concern the city that are on the agenda of the conference that you're attending. You just can't get together and all have a cup of coffee and then start talking about city business just because you all happen to be together. That's a violation of the Brown Act. Community meetings are appropriate as long as the community meeting is initiated by another organization, that you do not talk about business, city business, except to the extent of what is on the agenda of that community meeting, I'm sorry. You can go to other legislative bodies. For instance, let's assume a Royal Grande was having a council meeting. Can a majority of you go to that council meeting? The answer is yes, as long as you don't talk about city business. Can you go to another standing committee meeting? The answer is yes, as long as you don't talk about city business. And there's a unique exception to standing commissions or committees. You can't participate. In the other meetings, you're allowed to. In standing committees, you can only be there in terms of observing, and you cannot participate. Social and ceremonial events. These are another hotspot for areas where you can potentially get into trouble. Can you go to a Christmas party or a holiday party or a ceremonial event where you're cutting the ribbon or something like that? Yes, you can. Again, you can't talk about city business. There was something else I wanted to mention in regards to, well, let's go to the next slide. It'll come to me. I can, at this point, I can pause for a moment if any of you have any questions that you want to ask. I can certainly entertain questions. Don't see anybody unmuting, so we'll go on. Posting of notice. These are just some of the simple noticing requirements. Typically, your clerk will handle most of those for you. But if you have a regular meeting, you have a 72-hour required notice. It has to be posted in accessible public places. The agency must mail the agenda to those who have requested it in writing. If you have a special meeting, you're noticing changes, you have to notice it in 24 hours prior to the meeting. And in an emergency meeting, it's an emergency, so typically the noticing requirements of the special meeting are required with the exception of the 24-hour notice. And the only requirement is to the extent that you can accommodate it, you should notice those who have requested for notice and the public media at least 1 hour prior to the meeting. Notice of special meetings also must be sent to all the members of the body on the commission and news media that have requested that notice. Next slide. You're not allowed to take action on a matter that is not on your agenda. You can give direction to staff to bring back matters on future agendas. One note that it's really up to you as a body, but if you have workshops and things of like that, where you are not actually taking action, you're not approving it, you're not disapproving it or anything of that nature, you do not have to give the public a right to speak to that. But that's a policy decision on your part if you want to do that. If you're taking an action on a matter, it is required under the law that you give the public the right to speak to it. You are allowed to respond to questions from the public during a meeting and provide references to staff or other resources for factual information. Up until the pandemic and the governor's orders related to the pandemic, the public was mandated to be allowed to be in your meetings. The rules changed after the governor's initial executive orders, and then also based on recent legislation to do virtual meetings as we are doing right now. So that will probably change in the near future, but for the time being, that one has pretty much been suspended. Next slide, please. So I'm going to briefly discuss closed sessions with you. I think in my history, I've only taken 2 commissions into closed session. So it's not done very often. But one of the opportunities within which I, as your lawyer, or the city manager or staff have an opportunity to sit down with you and talk to you outside of earshot of the public is in closed session, where we can speak to you in a quorum or more. The Brown Act strongly favors open meetings, and so our right to do that is strictly limited to what the statutes say we're allowed to do. So essentially, private gatherings are prohibited unless expressly authorized. I will give you one example, and I think this is what I was trying to remember earlier, of where you can get into trouble, especially in social gatherings or just going out to lunch together. One of my prior clients had 3 council members who all went out to lunch, and they were sitting there talking city business, and somebody sitting next to them happened to know the Brown Act, took their telephone, took a snapshot of it, didn't know me at all, but picked up my information from the website and sent me a picture while it was going on, suggesting that these 3 council members were in fact in violation of the Brown Act. So just be aware that when you are at these kinds of events, such as conferences and other legislative bodies meetings, even if you go out to lunch, you're not prohibited from going out to lunch. You just can't talk about city business. Next slide. The agenda on closed sessions is usually statutorily defined. It's what we call a safe harbor. So we will put on the agenda exactly what we're going into. The agency must make a public disclosure in the open session before we go in, and there may be legal requirements for me to report out what you did in there, but I won't go into any detail with that. It's very specific in the statutes as to what we have to do in terms of reporting out and what we don't have to do or what we don't have to report out. Next slide. These are essentially the 7 areas that the legislature allows us. One is litigation. If I want to talk to you in the context of an ongoing litigation, I can real estate negotiations, public employment, which wouldn't involve you, labor negotiations, grand jury testimony, license applications. Most of these are not going to involve you. But these are the areas that I can go into closed session about. And if one of these were ever to involve you, we were ever to go into closed session, this would be the legislative basis upon which we can do it. Next slide. Now, this is why I give you this seminar or this short description of the Brown Act, because if you violate it, it's a criminal act. And it can be prosecuted by the district attorney as a criminal act. Those violations are considered a misdemeanor. And not only can a district attorney bring an action, but any interested party can bring a civil action to prevent further violations. Essentially, what they get out of that is a court order to nullify whatever you did. And for the most part, they get court costs and attorney's fees for doing it. At the end of the day, what the remedy for that is typically we go back and cure the problem and do it right. In my decades of being a city attorney, I think I can only think of one event that a district attorney has ever formally filed a criminal action for an agency that violated the Brown Act. So it doesn't happen. It doesn't happen very often. But I just caution you, if you ever think that there is an issue, I would highly recommend that you call me. My office is always open 24/7 for the most part. My cell phone is on the website, so give me a call and I'm happy to give you advice on areas that you might think you have a concern about. And certainly we can make sure that you don't have any problems. Next slide. Now it's time for questions and answers or comments.
Are there any questions from the public or committee members? Okay, if no questions, let's move to the next item on the agenda. Item 3 on the agenda is a review of measures X06 and F20 transactions and use tax revenues and expenditures for FY 2020-2021 and review of measure K14 expenditures and projects for FY 2019-20. And before we go ahead.
No, I was just gonna chime in, but after you, Mr. Chair.
Before we go into the presentation, I know that I have several questions that I think would behoove to be asked before the presentation. And if any other committee members have questions they'd like to ask before the presentation, then that would also be great. So in the last committee meeting, the city manager, Mr. Bronson, had given us a description of the committee and its duties. And in the description, he said that it is not an audit committee and that it is a review committee. I just wanted to see clarification on the duties of the committee. In Ordinance 20-10, Part 1, Section N, it expressly uses the word audit in reference to the committee's duties. Now, the ordinances for the K14 and the X06 do not use the word audit, but for F20 it does. And then so I would ask for the city attorney or the city manager's comment as to whether or not we are to sit in an audit fashion for F20.
And I can take a first crack at that answer, Mr. Chair, and then perhaps the city attorney can weigh in as well. Yes, we worked with the Citizen Oversight Committee to provide general oversight into the revenues generated for these different measures and then the expenditures carried out as part of them. And as part of that, there is a role of auditing in general, and perhaps part of the differentiation is in the strictness of the word audit and what's engaged in the audit process. And Ms. Purcell can also elaborate on this further. Our audit is a very detailed process involving an outside auditor that spends several months working with city staff, going through every line item, every account, every fund, every record. And that is a process that goes on every year that every city goes through. And that's an important part of our financial management. We really are asking the committee to take a look at the audited information, the audited statements, the audited documents that are reflected here in this draft report, but also the other information sent to you, and really being able to ask questions for clarity, being able to have a better understanding of how these dollars for the tax measures were generated and the uses that they were put forth. It's not intended to be a line-by-line, detailed, fine-tooth audit into every single expense that was carried out for these particular measures and the street measure in particular, but really reviewing audited statements and having some oversight into what we say we generate, what we say we do as a representative body of the community. So that's what we really mean by the role of auditing what we do. It's not an audit committee, which typically goes through the entire outside audit in exhausting detail, which right now we don't have at the council level, let alone at a committee level. We give the council the audit when at the end of the process, and then we ask for their approval. So from there, let me ask if Mr. Hale has anything to add to that, or Ms. Purcell, if you'd like to add anything from your standpoint as overseeing our city audit.
Not really a lot from my perspective, other than that has always been my understanding of the city's intent, council's intent in the context of the audit functions. They're a rather somewhat high level, as Mr. Bronson has discussed. So I would think I would concur in terms of my understanding historically what the practice has been.
Yes, and I agree with Mr. Hale and Mr. Bronson in that our audit is extensive. We're going through it right now. It's a 6-month process, and we have new auditors this year who are really going through it with a fine-tooth comb. So I feel very confident that our audit, our external audit that we go through is very detailed in nature, and I don't see any necessity in having somebody else do the same.
Okay, it appears that the committee's function, being very limited in scope, is two-part. One is to review for compliance, and two is to simply provide any additional advice or counsel we may have to the city council. Regarding the first duty of reviewing for compliance, measures F20 and X06 are both general revenue funds, and so the compliance is self-evident as non-compliance cannot take place. Therefore, we can only review K14 for compliance. K14 requires that a separate fund be created with a specific name and that all bond proceeds be deposited therein. It also requires a cap on the amount of interest paid for the bonds, as well as the total amount of bonds issued. A review of the report reveals that the interest requirement is in compliance and the capital amount is in compliance, that we are $20 million short of the limit. However, based on the report that was submitted, I was unable to ascertain whether or not the separate financial account that was prescribed has been created, and I was likewise not able to ascertain whether or not the bond proceeds are exclusively in that account and not commingled with other funds.
Mr. Chair, if I can just maybe jump in for a second, I think that's a good question that I'd like Ms. Purcell to answer, but I think this could be an example of what could be addressed after Ms. Purcell goes through her presentation to just provide an overview of the report and the funding sources and accounts, and maybe that would provide some context for not just this, but other questions that could arise as part of this process. So if you're amenable, Mr. Chair, I think having Ms. Purcell be able to walk through the material might provide an opening for other questions that come up to be able to make sure we're answering the committee's questions in the best of our ability.
Okay, that sounds great. If you'd like to go ahead, that'd be wonderful.
Great, thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. And I will try and I have your questions, and I'll try and keep those in mind and maybe answer them as I'm going through the presentation. And then afterwards, we'll if there's anything I didn't answer, I'm happy to answer at the end of my presentation. So let's start. we're looking really at the annual report that was presented in your agenda packet. And the annual report, staff prepares a draft annual report, and then the Oversight Committee reviews and approves that report. So hopefully you've had a chance to review that. There is a section on the Measure K. We have a summary that basically talks about the projects that have been completed, the projects that are currently being worked on, and then any expected projects that are going to be beginning in the future. It also shows a map that has the completed projects, current projects, and future projects that are outlined. And I show it here. I don't expect you to be able to read it, but it is shown in that annual report. So let's talk about Measure K14. You asked about the fund, and we do have a separate fund. It's Fund 20. So if you look at the trial balance that was included in that agenda packet or the general ledger detail, that first number, it says 20. That is on our account code structure. Fund 20 is the first number that you see. So it is a separate fund. We also have a separate bank account for each bond issue. So each time we issue a bond, we keep that in a separate account so that we can track the spending on each separate bond issue. It's not, we don't have an account for all of the bonds. It's actually a separate account for each bond issuance.
You referenced to the balance page where it shows the account. Could you just point that out one more time?
Yeah, so if you look at both the trial balance and the general ledger detail, if you look at that very first number in the account string, the first number is 20. So that's our fund. So the account structure, the first string, 20 represents our fund. Then the program number, which is kind of the department or the programs within the department. You'll see in Fund 20, it's normally 16 with another number. Those are normally public works programs or departments. The next account string in that general ledger detail is our object code or account code. So revenue accounts start with the 4 and expense accounts start with the 5. And then we have an identifier that follows that string, and that's normally 3 zeros unless we want to have some specific tracking. And that's followed by the project number. So you'll see all the projects within our Fund 20 start with a 2295, and then it has a dash and then the number. And if we have somebody here in Public Works, they could talk about a specific project if you had a question on any of the project expenditures, but we track it down to project level. And that you'll find that on the general ledger detail that we provided to you.
So the 20 that begins at the account number series, that references a financial account or just an internal account for accounting purposes?
That is our internal fund numbers. So for example, 01 is our general fund. Fund 20 is our streets fund. So that's our Measure K fund. If you were to look at our financial report, if you've ever looked at our CAFR, our comprehensive annual financial report, and I think it's on page, let's see. If you look on page 25, you can reference this later. We have it on our website, or I can forward it to you. But you'll see that we show our general fund separate, and our street rehab and repair fund is right next to that. So it's reported separately in our financial statements.
Okay, thank you. If you want
Does that help a little bit?
Yes,
okay.
Thank you.
And any other questions you have on that, I'm happy to answer. So just looking at this slide here, we see our revenues. We have all of our bond issuances from 2015. We had 5 million, 2016, 8 million. Our last bond issuance was in 2017 for 15 million. With a total including interest, 28,106,000. Looking at our expenditures in total to date, as of June 30th, 2021, we spent almost 24 million. So what does that mean? We have 4 million left over from all those bond issuances, and the leftover right now really represents what we have left from the 2017 bond issue. So to date, I can tell you we're at about 2.5 million currently, and we plan on spending the rest of that. I think February is estimated date. We're looking at issuing more bonds. We're going to council in December for a new bond issuance. We're recommending 10 million. So stay tuned on that. But that's really what this whole picture is trying to say, that we have 48 million in bonds. We've issued 28 million. We're looking to maybe issue another 10 million in our next issue, which will happen at the beginning of next fiscal year. And there's already a CIP plan in place for that, our future spending. So that is our Measure K. Like you said, Chairman, the Measure K is really the one that you can take a closer look at. I'm going to look at their sales tax, which is more of a general tax. So that's harder to really do a big overview on, because it's in our general fund, and it's a general tax. So the Measure X06, that's our 0.5%. That was approved by voters in 2006. As I said, general use tax used to fund city services and projects within the general fund. Let me back up. I'm sorry. I wanted to go over this chart a little bit. So you can see in 2019, we started seeing bigger increases or percent changes. 2020, we had a 15% change, and 2021 is 16% change from the prior year. Our average for the last 2 years is 15.8%. Our last 5 years, we've had a 10% increase average. So those are big increases, and you might wonder why. And I wanted to answer that for you, because you do see such a big increase in these last couple of years, and that really mainly has to do with our cannabis tax. That was a new tax that came on board in 2018. We really saw a full year's worth of that in 2019. So there was also a big jump in sales tax, because cannabis sales are also include sales tax. So that's why we're seeing, one of the reasons we're seeing such big increases in our sales tax. So I just wanted to point that out for you. And then moving on to we have a new sales tax measure F20. That's a 1% tax that was approved just recently by voters in November of 2020. That is also a general tax used to fund city services and projects. That became effective in April of this year. So we collected 3 months of revenue, April, May, and June. We collected $573,000. And I wanted to point out that we have budgeted that we're expecting to collect $2.2 million from this new revenue source in fiscal year 22, our current year. So with that, that's just a very brief overview, and I want to give you an opportunity to ask any questions on this annual report that I just went over.
And one more quick thing is that in addition to Ms. Purcell, we also have Aaron Wiggin on the line. Aaron is our capital projects manager and oversees our street repair projects. And so if the committee has any questions about previous or upcoming street projects, Ms. Wiggin will be able to address those questions. Thank you. And you're on mute, Mr. Chair.
Thank you. Thank you. As I was mentioning earlier, there's two duties for us to perform. One is compliance with a review for compliance, and the other is just general advisory commentary. There's no review for compliance on X06 and F20, so nothing further to do there in that context. So it brings us back to K14. And I understand that there was an explanation about the ledger that was provided in the agenda packet. And as I'm reading through it, even after the presentation, I guess I'm still struggling to confirm compliance with Section 10A of Ordinance 1405. Sections 5 and 6, the compliance is evident from the report, but not Section 10. And so I would just ask, I would feel uncomfortable recommending adopting a report that I didn't have full confidence in my understanding of it. And it being, complying with how the statute prescribes. So where it says a separate account called Street Construction Designated Fund, would that appear in one of the city's Excel spreadsheets?
Well, like I said, it appears in our comprehensive annual financial report. We have a separate fund. It's reported separately, but also, as I explained, that first number, that 20 that you see, even if you were to look in our budget book or our financial statements, we have a listing of all of our funds. So it's listed there as a separate fund. I can give you, if you want me to provide you, I can send you a list of all of the funds so that you have it. But it's in, like I said, it's in our annual budget report. It's also in our comprehensive financial report. But I also can provide you a list of all of our funds, and that shows us it as a separate fund as well.
Okay, wonderful. Do any other committee members have questions?
This is Karen Cass, is that like a standard chart of accounts that would be in front of the your annual report? So if we go to the annual report, does it show that nomenclature you were describing then?
What we provided in the agenda packet, is that what you're referring to?
Not in the agenda packet, but what you were referring to the annual report?
The annual report that I just presented is also in the agenda. But the comprehensive, is that what you're asking, the annual financial report?
Yes.
You can find that on our website.
Okay.
So we have, we also have our budget that's included on our website. We are happy to provide that also too, if you want that as a something that you want to review, but you can. I can send you a link to our website if you'd like.
Yeah. As long as it's there on the website, we should be able to go to it. We have a question about the structure, we should be able to find it, correct?
Yes.
Okay.
As far as the chart of accounts, I have a chart of accounts guide if you want to see how our account structure is, that I just went over, how the account coding structure is set up. But I think your main concern, you can correct me if I'm wrong, but you're concerned that you want to make sure that we're reporting as a separate fund. Is that correct?
Not simply reporting, but also in practice, that there is an account where the bond proceeds exist within and no other funds from any other source exist therein with it.
Yes, and excuse me, and that's what we were trying to show with our agenda packet with the attachments. Both of those show, if you look at the general ledger detail and if you look at the trial balance, that is Fund 20, that's just that's our Measure K fund. We don't put anything else in there. It's its own fund, and that's where everything gets recorded.
So does that also mean that the trial balance and transaction ledger we were provided reveals no information for X06 and F20?
That's correct. And Measure F06 and F20, as we said, is a general tax. That you'll find that in our general fund, which is Fund 1.
And maybe just to add to that, Mr. Chair, I think the Oversight Committee role does differ a bit based on the measures. The two tax measures, as Ms. Purcell mentioned, are general tax measures. So the expenditures are what we do as a city. Police officers, parks and recreation, city administration. So there's really a more indirect oversight compliance role there. It's really about, are we generating the revenues that we believe we generate, and for the committee to be able to have a space to ask questions and feel comfortable about the revenues that are coming in. On K14, there is more of a defined role, and I think that's where we're really depending upon the committee and then ultimately the council to make sure that the money generated for K14 is spent on street repairs. It's not spent on general fund services, not spent in other areas, but just on local street repairs. So it really matches the bond revenues and the expenditures for the different projects. And that's really, I think, a more refined oversight role that we're looking for from the committee.
And to that end, Ms. Parcell had just indicated that because the transaction detail report and the trial balance provided is exclusively pertaining to K14, and those funds are to be used exclusively for street projects, then I would, I guess, ask the question, if expenses for payroll, I advertising, street signs, a tissue dispenser, etc. If those transactions constitute payments for street purposes within K-14.
Well, included in measure or in Fund 20 is our overhead. So it's people that work on those projects. So that's what you're seeing the payroll. So for example, Erin Wiggins is on the line right now. Part of her salary gets coded to Fund 20. So it's allocated to, if she's working on a project, a Fund 20 project, her payroll will get allocated there as part of the overhead for the work done on that street. It's part of the expense of a project is the payroll, as a consultant would be, or any expenses that go into the street repair. I mean, it's part of the cost of.
So are the payroll transactions listed in this report exclusively compensation paid to city employees for street revenue projects, or
Yes.
is there included? So there's no payroll transactions in this report that was payment to an employee for work that was not related to the street projects.
That's correct.
And just to add to that, this also pays for the compensation costs of our maintenance crew, because the maintenance crew does a lot of work in tandem with the street projects. They're marking utility lines. They're helping to assist in curb ramp improvements. So part of the project also includes the maintenance costs that are in support of the project, though the vast majority of the expenses go to the contractors who are actually constructing the work.
Mm-hmm.
Understood. So I do have a few line item things to go through. I'm not going to belabor them. I promise it's just a few.
Okay.
It's just, if we are tasked with, recommending and adopting a report, well, let me take a step back. Where the ordinance states that the committee is to provide a report to the council, in the first instance, had the committee prepared the report itself, it would be a different process. But the report originates from staff. So therefore, our job is to determine whether or not that report should be adopted. And in order for us to make a decision on whether it should be adopted, we need to understand the information presented to us and have the complete information. And I guess I don't feel, at present that I do have the complete information or complete understanding. And I know we have some more time during this meeting to get a further understanding, but I do see that there's going to be probably further information that I personally would need to vote yes. So I just want to go through a couple of these line items. There was in June 30, 2021, a correction for a duplicate payment to Mr. Hale. But I see what appears to be a duplicate payment to Ms. Thurmond as well. And I just wanted to get someone's confirmation that it either is not a duplicate or is and needs to be corrected.
I think what you're referring to, there were 2 payments made to Ms. Thurmond at the end of the year. Is that what you're referring to? But they were different amounts?
Right. There are 3 payments issued on June 30th, and 2 of the payments share the same description of May 2021 and June 2021 attorney services. So I'm wondering if it's one payment for both months or if it's 2 separate payments and it's just being referred to as for each month.
So I had my staff look into that, and what it is those are 2 separate invoices for 2 separate litigations.
Okay. And on June 30th, 2021, the city's paid $205,000 to V. Lopez Jr. and Sons as a part of a settlement. Is there staff that can advise as to whether the dispute falls within the auspices of K-14?
Yes,
Leave that to our attorney.
yes. The claim that was submitted was for unpaid work. We had closed out the entire subject contract. We had paid off any change orders that were made. 4 months later, they submitted functionally $1 million claim. Actually, they submitted about a $400,000 or $500,000 claim, and a year later, it was up to $1 million. So that was a matter specifically related to alleged unpaid work, basically a synergistic effect related to the change orders. It was ultimately settled for $205,000.
And is that settlement related to the attorney's fees that were incurred that we were just discussing?
I'm not really sure what the attorney's fees we were discussing because I don't have that information in front of me, but
The payments to Ms. Thurman.
So
That
Ms.
too-
Thurman, am I allowed to say what those are for,
Of course.
Mr. Hale? Okay. So the first is for regarding V. Lopez litigation. The second is regarding a Southern California gas litigation.
Yeah, and I can tell you that the 205,000 is not inclusive of the attorney's fees for the city.
Understood. And I just want to understand more about how the report is presented. What is the source indicator in that column? How are we to read the source indicators?
The source indicator, so normally all these payments come through accounts payable, but if we have a correction or an adjustment, you'll see a GL, that stands for general ledger. It's just a general ledger adjustment, meaning it didn't come through accounts payable. It came through a manual adjustment by staff.
Okay, and during these categories of payroll expenses, there are intermittent instances of a referenced standalone batch. Is there a staff that could enlighten me as to what those are and how they come about?
Yes, we have a normal payroll cycle. So you'll see in most of the explanations, you'll see a payroll period. The standalone batches are manual checks. So sometimes we have to issue a manual check. For example, we have a vacation buyback that we do at the end of the year where we allow staff to buy back some of their vacation time and they cash it out. That's a separate manual check that we do. Sometimes we have to do a retro pay if somebody has an annual evaluation and they get a step increase, and it's retro back to the time that their annual evaluation was, say their evaluation was done in July, but their annual anniversary is in June, then we would have to do a retro pay, and that would be a manual check. So that's what the standalone represents. It's any time that we have to do an extra or manual check versus the normal pay period check.
Understood. And on page 5 of the transaction detail report, under contractual obligations, there are 3 transactions that occurred on January 11th, 2021, described as 2017 general obligation bonds, 2019-20 CD that were paid to Albert Pesci. It appears that it is $350 paid out, $350 received, and then $350 paid out again. I'm just wanting to get clarification on what these transactions are and if this is a final and accurate reflection of those transactions.
Was it $350?
That's correct.
Yeah, we have to do an annual disclosure, and he's our financial advisor. He prepares those reports for us, so that's probably what that was.
Okay, and then on the same page on February 5th, it's $290 was spent on a tissue dispenser. Is that an accurate reflection of the cost?
I would have to go back. Let me see if I might have that so I can look at it, but
I asked to not get in the nitty gritty about individual items, but to try to ascertain as to whether there may be a bigger problem that's indicative from these items. For example,
page was, I'm sorry, what page was that on? Page 5. Okay, let me take a look. Do you have the account number? That would help me.
It is 20-165-54050-000, and the transaction date is February 5, 2021.
And I'm wondering, because that comes from an engineering company, so I would have to go back and look at the detail on that. I mean, the description might not be right, is my guess, because if you look at the vendor, it says pavement engineering company. So a tissue dispenser doesn't make sense as far as the description. So can I highlight that, and I'll go back and look that one up. I didn't see that on your original question. So I'm sorry, I don't have that information available.
No problem. And again, I'm asking these questions not to get into, any particular transaction, but just because I'm wondering, if these contractors are, truly charging the city $290 for a tissue dispenser, I'm wondering how well the other contracts for the multi-million-dollar projects are being managed, and whether or not the city is overpaying to the tunes of, hundreds of thousands of dollars potentially, because of simply rubber stamping what the contractor sends over.
Yeah, let me look that over. Aaron, I know you're on the line. Do you have any recollection of that invoice, $290?
I don't.
Okay.
But I don't have anything in front of me, so sorry.
Yeah,
I
so
apologize.
we'll look that up. We'll get back to you.
And just maybe, Aaron, is pavement engineering one of the contractors that we use for various street projects?
So they can be used. They're a sub typically to some of the contractors, and they do all of our, or a lot of times they sub out all the compaction testing. So to make sure all of our compaction is appropriate for paving. So I will say they all have to provide their bids to the contractor, and then we do have to issue award the contract based on low bid. So I wouldn't have any indication that we're overpaying for things.
And I think I would just add that I think that's a good example where this is probably just a miscoding by our staff. This was not tissue dispensing at City Hall. This was a street repair item from a contractor that we work with on street repairs. It probably was just coded tissue dispensing. And typically when we have multiple items in one coding invoice, just the first item is what's listed. So I can assure you we don't spend $290 on a tissue dispenser at City Hall. Let me just be clear about that. There's probably a number of different things that were part of that particular contract, but it was not for pavement engineering. So we occasionally do that. I mean, once in a while in the volume of different invoices we pay, we may have a description that doesn't match up once in a while. So I think it's not indicative of overall overcharging. In this particular case, it was just a miscoding by a staff member earlier in the year.
Yeah, I'm looking it up right now, so I'm almost there. Give me one more second here. And it actually says services rendered. It doesn't say anything about tissue dispenser. So it's services rendered from January 1st through January 31st. Senior Pavement Management Tech is what the description says. Aaron, I don't know if you can. I can try. You know what? I can share this.
Very well could be a tissue dispenser though. We don't have like any further information that says the services rendered was not a tissue dispenser.
Let me share my screen because I think this might help Aaron too, but. Here you go. Can you see that? This is the actual invoice. There's actually an email that goes with it from Aaron to Lynn.
Okay. So this is not, they don't do pavement testing. They do all of our pavement management software updates. So I'm not sure why a tissue dispenser would be there. They do, they basically keep up with our Street Saver software that we use to analyze the pavement condition for all of our local streets and roads.
Okay, in the last meeting, if I remember correctly, there was a renovation of City Hall done during this fiscal year or coming up. I guess if that was true, then I just wouldn't be 100% convinced that it wasn't a tissue dispenser. But I don't want to get bogged down with any one transaction. On the same page, under the section construction, would an account number be helpful for reference?
Okay, wait, let me get back to where you're referring. What was your question? I'm sorry.
So on the same page, under the category for construction, do you need the account number to find it? Would that be helpful?
Yeah, I'm on the same page. If you just give me the account number, I can look at it.
So it's 20-900-58030-000.
Okay.
And there's several things within this category that are also in multiple other categories, but they're really densely here. So I just wanted to point it out here. So the first item I have a question about is where the description says this invoice combined with invoice number 359. I guess my question, it would be whether or not that is consistent with, you know, the accounting practices you guys use, is to describe the transactions in such a way.
You know what? I'll have to get back with our accounts payable clerk on that, and I can answer it better. But normally we like to have a good description so that we can tell what we're looking at here. If there is any question, though, it's very easy for us to go back and look it up by the vendor to see. I mean, if you want me to look up that invoice, I'm happy to do that for you.
No need to look up any individual one. I'm just trying to get a grasp of the practices. And so in the same section, a couple items down, there's a transaction description 2295-11 Aaron. How is the committee to determine that that is related to a street project for K14?
Well, you can ask the question as you have, Mr. Chair, and I'd be glad to have Ms. Wiggins speak to that.
So I'm not sure how the committee would know other than the project number 2295-11 is the construction project that we recently completed. And Blueprints Express is the outfit that we use to print all of our drawings that we provide to the contractor. That's part of our requirements. We provide them with full-size plans so they can build everything appropriately.
That was very helpful. Thank you.
Okay.
And again, in the same category, there are multiple transactions with new times, and these transactions with new times appear intermittently in all categories. Is that intentional or incidental?
So, is it okay if I answer that one?
Yes.
Okay. We have to, by law, we have to advertise. We have to pay for advertising all of our bids and all of our designs. So we have to pay for advertising. You'll see it frequently because that's the publisher that we generally use. We used to use the Tribune, and now we use New Times.
I guess, why would the transactions come up effectively under every category rather than its own neat category or tied to specific projects? It appears to be accounted for in every location. I guess I just trying to understand why the accounting is done that way.
I'm not sure I would be the best one to answer that question.
Do you allocate that expense between funds? That was just a guess as to what it could be.
I would have to look at this a little more in detail to be able to answer that.
Okay. I don't have any further questions on the balance sheet right now. Do any other committee members have questions at this time? Or comments? All right. Well, the recommended action is to review the information and provide direction to staff for the preparation of a report to the City Council. And I understand that I might be a lone voice here, so I want to ask whether the other committee members want to approve the report as submitted, or whether the other committee members want to provide further direction.
I'd like to have the answers that we brought up today, answers to those questions before we move forward. I'm a new committee member and it will help me in reviewing the P&L in the future.
So then I would move to calendar a special session of this committee prior to the end of the year. So we have an opportunity to have more complete information and make a final decision on whether or not we want to recommend the report be adopted to the council.
Can I ask, so what are the additional questions? The only one that I have on my list is the new times, but I felt like we answered all of the other questions.
So some of the answers pointed us back to the documents available online, including the budget. And I know myself individually and maybe other committee members would like an opportunity to go review those documents further in context of today's discussion.
All right, I just wanted to make sure there wasn't anything you were looking for from us. I do have the one question. I feel like we didn't answer the new times question, but so is there anything else you need to hear from us as far as an answer to a question that we weren't able to satisfy you?
I think that a lot of the questions may be answered through due diligence of the documents available online, but it may be that upon review, secondary documents could be necessary. And we could move to put that on the agenda for a special session if the committee approves one, to create an opportunity for a follow-up document request, just to make sure that we have full and complete information before adopting the report.
Understood. Thank you.
So at this time, I'm going to renew my motion to schedule a special session of the committee prior to the end of the year for the purposes of the committee members getting the information needed to make a recommendation.
And just good.
I'll second that.
Are there any objections?
Just
If there are no objections,
a point of a clarification, Mr. Chair. Just from a timing standpoint, we will work with that pending your vote. The last council meeting of the year is December 13th. So from the staff perspective, we would suggest that we do this special meeting by late November, by the end of this month, early December, so that we could be on track to be able to have the report go to the council at that last council meeting, reflecting the committee's discussion and action at that time.
would the committee members prefer a special session take place prior to Thanksgiving or after Thanksgiving?
For myself, I am unable to do it before Thanksgiving, but I don't have to be there.
Okay, and does November 30th sound like a good date for the other committee members?
Actually, November 30th is fine with me too, so.
November 30th at 2 p.m.
That works for me.
So I'd move to schedule a special session for November 30th at 2 p.m. Committee members, anyone in objection? Okay, then all in favor say aye.
Aye.
Okay, so the committee is scheduling a special session for November 30th at 2 p.m. At this time, want to move to approving minutes for that special session. I would motion that there be a minute for reconsideration of item 3 on today's agenda. Are there any objections? All in favor say aye.
Aye.
I would also motion that we reserve the opportunity to request further documents or information if needed from staff. Are there any objections? All in favor say aye.
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 Okay, the second item on the agenda for the
Mr. Chair, I'm
special
sorry. I'm sorry. Just since that impacts staff, I wanted to make sure I understood the intent of that particular motion. Are you wanting to make sure that we provide you with the information needed for the next special meeting on the 30th, or was there another intent behind that last motion that you made?
So between now and the 30th, we'll be reviewing the documents that are available online. On the 30th would be an opportunity for us to determine if we needed any secondary information or documentation based upon what was available online. And if that determination was made, I would want to reserve the opportunity for us to ask for that prior to the December 13th council meeting.
And I think what's typical is that you would discuss that as a committee on the 30th. And at that meeting, if the committee wished to have more information, we could provide that to you. I would say that the 30th is when we'd be asking for an action either way, because we have to be able to prepare the report for the council meeting on the 13th. That will go forward on that meeting. We would be asking the committee to make a recommendation at that meeting on the 30th. So you could request additional information, but we would be asking for a recommended action on the 30th.
Then could the city attorney advise in the Brown Act context as to how we might request additional information from the committee between now and November 30th without violating the Brown Act?
The city attorney had to step away for another engagement, but what I would say is that any member of the committee can ask the staff member for the committee or commission for information before a meeting. That is entirely within your right. You just can't do that involving more than two individuals. So if you, Mr. Chair, or Ms. Holden as vice chair, or any committee member wanted information, you could ask. I'll ask Ms. Purcell as the lead for that information before the 30th. That's always your right as a committee member in advance of a committee meeting. That's an individual request, not a committee request, because the committee hasn't requested that beyond after this meeting closes today.
Does that mean we don't CC the rest of the committee? It's just an individual request?
Yes, that is really important from the Brown Act standpoint, that outside of this discussion, which is a Brown Act open public discussion, any requests for information, or if you wish to have a meeting, is done individually. Be able to keep that line of communication strictly for the Brown Act. You can involve a second person, but I would highly recommend that it be an individual request to keep those decisions and keep those actions at the individual level.
That's perfect. That allows the committee members to conduct their due diligence as they see fit, and for each committee member to reach their independent judgment on a final adoption. Okay, so just to restate it, we have scheduled a special session for November 30th at 2 p.m. And the committee at that time will be reconsidering item 3 on today's agenda, which is reviewing the report. And if there is no public comment, questions, or anything from the committee members or staff, then we can adjourn. All right, no further comment. Then I'm going to adjourn today's meeting, and we will see you guys again on the 30th.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.